Hey guys, I'm just gonna starting a live stream here called the Happiness Q&A, where I will be talking briefly for about 15 minutes on how teachings in Islam, and I'll give you a basic introduction as to what Islam is, which is, in short, a religion that connects all other religions. Um, so I'll be talking about how you can find happiness through spiritual values that you don't necessarily have to be a Muslim to experience. I've invited a couple of people from the Meetup group that I've made, but anybody can ask questions if you see this Q&A. Yeah, so there'll be a 15-minute introduction and then just ask questions away. It's very chilled out. I don't really know what I'm doing. It's my bedroom here. You guys can give me some feedback as to how we should do this thing. Officially, it should start at 1 o'clock, so just wait for a minute before we really get going. Um, I was thinking I'll pick one particular topic, so people have got something concrete to talk about. But generally, I think happiness has a very vast. There's a lot of things to talk about. So, uh, in terms of happiness as an individual, happiness within your environment, literally, like talking about environmental issues, government, uh, economics, it is relationships. Um, there are many things that affect our personal happiness and our societal happiness. So it looks like people are joining in. I've got thumbs up, which I don't normally get. So that's awesome. I do a lot of experimental things, and I don't normally expect much back. But if something goes well, that's awesome. So anyway, I'm going to try doing a little uh, class, as it were, a little chat for 15 minutes. And so the little topic I want to talk about, and it's a really small quote. I'm going to my computer, by the way, to uh, remind myself of these few words. Moderation is half of happiness. That's what I like to begin with. So let me put the camera back on so I can see what you guys are seeing. You weren't seeing the middle of my belly. Um, Moderation is half of happiness. Those are words of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Uh, and the reason why I picked that, partly because I just looked for a quote that had the word happiness in it, but also one of the things I find quite amusing about spiritual techniques for happiness is that they're so completely the opposite of what most people who are, let's say, who are not particularly interested in spirituality, or like the average Joe, or what you see on TV, think is happiness. So moderation, it sounds quite boring, yet in practice you'll find that those people who are calm are actually happier. And we can see that in examples really quickly. I tend to give extreme examples because they're easier to understand. So if you were to take drugs, you would be happier for a short period of time, or if you have a sugar-filled diet, you'll be happier for a short period of time. But for in the long term, even alcohol, if you consume alcohol, you'll be happier for a short period of time. I like the example of alcohol actually, because when you drink alcohol, it's known as a depressant, even though people use it for social activities, like when we have a Christmas lunch at school, a lot of half the teachers are drinking alcohol because they find it helps them relax, which is a shame. Why do people need to drink alcohol to relax? So people are using it as if it makes them happy, but medically it's known to make you sad, because the long-term effect is it will make you sad. And the same is with drugs, and I'm sure with sugar. Uh, and slowly we're becoming more clued up about these things. I think in the past, I'll tell you something funny, I suppose, remotely funny. I'm not sure if it's that funny, but when I was a kid, when I was a baby rather, I was fed Ribena. Ribena is a British drink, I believe, uh, full of sugar, because in those days, that was in the 1980s, people didn't realize how bad sugar was, which sounds quite shocking, doesn't it? Okay, so people are becoming more and more clued up about what is healthy, I think, and beginning to go towards that. And they hopefully, it'll be easier to understand from that why moderation can lead to happiness. So anything, I've given that very short introduction to uh, an idea that can lead to happiness, and I'm going to go into that in more depth in a minute. But there are all these things that I feel need to be explained, and feel free, by the way, just to put in something in the chat if you have an idea. If you disagree with me, that's totally fine, because then we have a conversation going, and then I can explain things as well. So one of the key things I want to explain very quickly before getting into more depth about one idea of happiness, and I feel it really needs to be explained, is why Islam? Like, why not talk about happiness through any other religion? So Buddhists are famous for talking about happiness through Buddhism. And the brief answer is that Islam is a very interesting religion in the sense that it actually, how can I say, says that it's connected to all other religions. So there's a verse in the Quran that says, "For every people, for every time, we have sent messengers." And from my understanding, Buddha, for example, is a prophet of God. And I can go into depth about that more. And some people might be shocked, like, how can Buddhists would often be quite unhappy if anybody connects God with um, Buddhism, because especially Western Buddhists, in my opinion, go to Buddhism rather than many other forms of spirituality, because they want to escape the idea of believing in God. But with a bit of inspection or thought about the Buddhist beliefs and practices, you'll see that they very much do believe in God. Yeah, so there's a lot of connections. So I believe in Hinduism, at least the origins of it, Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrianism. I believe in the mother, they call it Mother Nature forms of spirituality in the Amazon rainforest, even the tribal religions of what do they call it? The people, Aborigines. If you go into their beliefs, you'll see that there are a lot of similarities, especially originally they all believed in one God. They might not seem so, like if you look at Hinduism, you might think they all believe in many, many gods, but with a bit of inspection of thought, when we can discuss this, if you like, you'll find that they actually believed in one God. So Islam connects all religions, and actually part of the reason for let's say, the coming of Islam is to take other religions out of a state of mythology, because a lot of things that were not originally part of the religion were brought in. For example, very briefly, so people can understand, and there's not too much debate about this, Father Christmas. Father Christmas, Santa Claus didn't exist at the time of Jesus. Nobody believes that that's a original teaching of Christianity, but it's come in. And there are so many other Okay, there we go. My wife needed some baby wipes. This is not a professional thing by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah, so yeah, just wanted to explain that at least. And I very briefly also wanted to explain that every teaching of Islam is geared towards happiness. And I would say every teaching of every religion is geared towards happiness. And there's that general misunderstanding that religion is there to make you miserable in this life, so that you might be happy in the next life. And that's a big misunderstanding. Um, in the teachings of Islam, very briefly, it says that for those who do good, there will be two gardens, and there's a lot of metaphors and well understood metaphors. They're not just vague meanings. So gardens meaning something blissful, and paradise is considered a garden, and the meaning of this thing that people do good will have two gardens is that you will not have happiness in the next life unless you have happiness in this life. And you might be thinking, what about all those poor people who are starving and whatever, and they are spiritual, they believe in God, and they try to do good things. They don't look like they're going to be happy in this life. The strange thing is, those people can be happier than the richest people in the world. And we are beginning to find through all sorts of psychological experiments that you can be happy with having a lot less. I'm not against capitalism, not against making money, but we are finding through all sorts of psychological experiments that I'm going to briefly mention as well, um, uh, that you can be happy with a lot less. You do not need to buy things to be happy. You need some food, I suppose, right? Um, so then the last thing I very briefly want to mention about a misunderstanding about religion is that it's not scientific. And I will like to say and explain in this talk, and maybe further talks that people are interested in, that in fact religion is far ahead of science, and science just keeps on proving religious teaching. So a very simple religious teaching that most people are aware of is that you should be generous, you should give to poor people and things like that. And there's a fantastic talk, TED Talks. I'm going to use my science. Is what most people understand as popular science, which is if you go to a TED Talk, TED Talk, I'm sure lots of people know what TED Talks are. You find them on YouTube or whatever. There's a great TED Talk which is entitled something like How You Can Buy Happiness. And the way you can buy happiness is by buying things for other people, by being generous. So again and again, you'll find that religious teachings will make you happier. So for the last 4 minutes of my little chat, I'm going to go more into this idea of moderation can buy you or get you half of happiness, as the quote goes. So everything Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, says actually comes from the Quran. So that is the key source of all information regarding Islam or spiritual teachings of Islam. Uh, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that's what Muslims say. We always say peace be upon him, or peace and blessings be upon him, for any prophet. He spent his whole life explaining the details of the Quran for people who might misunderstand something or not bother spending too much time reading the whole of the Quran. So he would just simplify things in specific situations for different people. So it's not like it's an addition to the Quran, it's just explaining things for people who didn't study stuff themselves. For example, maths is there. Anybody can study maths. I'm a math teacher, but it's often you need a math teacher to explain it to you, just because you yourself haven't spent time studying it yourself. You can feel free to study yourself without me if you want, for example. And the Quran is available on the internet for anybody to read, including explanations if they want translations in many, many languages. So anyway, moderation is half of happiness. So a part of the Quran that relates to this is a verse that talks about our particular time, the latter days, and it goes something like this: there will be a time, it says, or it says by the time means it's a phrase to say there's a promise that there will be a time. And this time, people feel at loss or feel like losers. Uh, they will, in another way of saying it, is they will feel depressed. A large group of people in society will feel depressed. And why is that? Or except for those people, rather than saying why is that, because it talks about that in many, many ways in the Quran, is those people who do not do the following things as a step-by-step guide, and that is have faith or believe in spiritual teaching, step one. So if you don't have that, you will not find happiness, and it's leading to this moderation thing. And if you don't do good things, you will feel at loss. And this is a sense that people don't talk about being depressed in society, but there is a sort of overhang as you grow up and become an adult, and you don't follow doing something meaningful in your life. You will find that even if people don't, if you don't express it to other people, or they're not expressing it to you, because it's a bit of an embarrassing thing to talk about. People do feel either depressed. If depressed is a strong word, then maybe feel a lot of tension. And there are a lot of, you know, surveys done that people find a lot of stress, tension, things in their lives, and it's a very common experience in our time. Okay, so if you do not have hope or faith or belief in God, or follow spiritual teachings, that was the first thing. Believe is summarized in that word. Or if you do not do good things, or if you do not tell people, if you actively don't tell people about spiritual truth. And finally, the word that I'm looking for is have patience, then you will be unhappy. Okay, and so let me explain that. So patience is a very you might know that the Quran is taught in, or the original language is in Arabic, and it's kept in Arabic, very importantly, and there are many, many translations. Arabic is a very, let's say, a deep language, which one word has so many meanings in other languages, or so many explanations. And this word patience actually has some very interesting meanings which relate to happiness, and that is that if you are patient, the word is sabr. It means that one of the key meanings is that you're very calm. You do, and it's particularly interesting that it means if you do not get too excited and do not get too sad. The interesting thing is not getting too excited, because we think happiness looks like jumping up and down and getting excited. But if you look at people who are not particularly happy, and I'm thinking of a movie, I think it was Bridesmaid or something. There was this person who was over hyper and wanted to take pictures of everything, and that they were portraying that particular person as a depressed person, even though she would keep giving the impression that she's really happy. So I think I'm relating to I'm talking about a Hollywood movie, but when Hollywood movies depict things, they I think there's a general understanding that people understand what's going on. That is that if you're too excited all the time, it's actually a sign that you're not a particularly happy person. So strangely, again, happiness is really about moderation, coming back to that word moderation or patience. So the word in Arabic for patience is to be calm, and specifically not getting too excited or too sad. But another very interesting and very important meaning related to this word patience is your willingness to accept failure. Because in life, if you want to do anything, you're very likely to fail. And if you do things where you're not likely to fail, then you are basically doing nothing. You're already dead, as it were, because you're not experiencing life. You're not trying new things. So to be content with failure is a key part to being happy. In fact, yeah, it's quite likely, just to give a picture of things, or to give a concrete example. Here's an example of me doing something that's very, very likely to be a total failure. I have zero expectations of this working or being of any use, but the fact that there are it says 3 people watching. Great, I've won. Okay, fantastic, I've won. And just to explain that a little bit more, how I won. There's a teaching in Judaism and Islam that goes something like, if you save a life of one person, you've saved all of humanity. And if you kill one person, then it's like you've killed all of humanity. What does that even mean? How is that even possible? How does that logically make sense? Well, basically, in spiritual teachings, we are all one human family. So that's why in many religious settings, everybody's called a brother or sister, and everybody's an auntie or whatever, right? Okay, so in those settings, if say you're around a table and your brother dies, right? After your brother dies and you come back for dinner as a family, you will all feel miserable. One person has died, but it feels as if all of you have died. If you save one person, on the other hand, it's like you all feel invigorated and very happy about it. So anyway, that's my quick introduction, trying to explain a few things, maybe make something to talk about, just a couple of discussion points. I really want people to feel free to, disagree with me, ask questions, whatever. It's actually quite hard for me to just keep talking. I'm gonna have a drink. Got some tea with me, cold tea. Yeah, just ask a question if you want, because it's quite hard for me just to keep talking to myself. It's recorded, so it's not a total waste. People are listening here. That's good. 1 second. You probably don't want to hear me sipping nice and loudly straight into your ears. Okay, so yeah, I could talk for an hour. It's just hard work talking by myself. I'm not really complaining. Thank you for listening. Appreciate you coming along. I wonder how many people have come from the Meetup group I organized. So I organized a Meetup group. There's a website called meetup.com, and the original intention was that people would come for free lunch every week or every month, and we would have face-to-face conversations. People could ask questions, and because our mosque, or all the mosques that I go to, provide food for the public, free food for the public, and really nice food, by the way. But I organized that just before this lockdown thing, coronavirus thing happened. So that means that we're attempting it this way, and I don't consider anything a bad thing. I suppose that's another offshoot topic. There are no accidents. If you believe in God, and so you could talk about that, like why would you believe in God? That doesn't seem to be scientific. Some people might think. The brief answer is the opposite of that is true. It's unscientific not to believe in God. So I don't think there are any bad things that happen to positively minded people. So everything happens for a reason, because there's a God, and every single atom is controlled by God. So there are no accidents. This whole life is planned in some ways. Not planned in the sense that you can't control anything, but yeah, I could go into detail, but yeah, there are no accidents. there are sort of pathways that God provides that there are limits to what you can do or something. You can't suddenly start flying without any contraptions or mechanical things. In the same way, there are limits to what you will be able to do. God has a plan, or has it's kind of like a big test. And I think that's a general understanding of how life works. In the spiritual domain, is at least. Okay, so yeah, and so everything happens for a reason. There's always some benefit to even bad situations. And again, what I'm saying here is actually a spiritual teaching, at least in Islam. I'm aware of spiritual teachings from different religions, but obviously I specialize in um, Islam. So in Islam, uh, there's a teaching that goes something like, for every situation a Muslim finds benefit. They find benefit, or they seek benefit in when they're given something, or even when they're denied something. And of course, if people want quotes, I can offer them. You know what? I feel like let me send a link, could be useful. So there's a nice little booklet, and all these booklets and materials that I use are free to use, freely available on the internet. So let me go back to here, and it has loads of little quotes in different realms of experience in terms of relationships, family life, business. Uh, so I've just put a link in the live chat, and I'll probably put a link in the comment section after the video is done, where people can read through them and reflect over those different ideas. So I'll just give a couple of examples of things that will lead to happiness. I'll just read them and maybe discuss them. So a deed is judged by its motive. How can that give you happiness? Well, a lot of people struggle with doing the right thing because they're concerned about the result. And now, if you're concerned about the result in your life of anything happening, then you are destined to be miserable because you cannot control outcomes of things. You can try your best to do good things, and generally speaking, they will work out. When I say generally speaking, like you might have to try a million times and then it might work out like eventually, right? Okay, if you persist. That's another spiritual teaching. But if you are depending on happiness, or depending on things going right so that you're happy, which is the modern materialistic way or approach to life, then you're guaranteed to be miserable because you cannot control outcomes. So I do watch a lot of interesting videos from these so-called self-help gurus, and in some ways they're correct, in some ways they're completely wrong. um, so just to, and they can be quite good at explaining things because that's what they focus on. So there was a story one person told that comes to mind about not being able to control outcomes, and that is some bloke, some guy, some man, trying not to use British terminologies like bloke, um, wanted to, patch up his relationship with his wife. So he thought he would surprise her and buy her a dress. And so it was a really expensive dress, and he's made a special effort, and he was really excited. And then he went to his wife and said, "Here you go, here's a dress." And instead of his wife being happy, she said, "After all these years, don't you even know my dress size?" And so he thought, there will be happiness if he would buy something and then deliver it to his wife and everybody be happy. But unexpectedly, he didn't think about this one thing. It's very common. We're human beings. We make mistakes. We don't think about every single detail. We can't really control everything that's going to happen, right? And so the opposite happened. He didn't find happiness. So you can't control outcomes. You can only try your best and put in your best foot forward. And so a deed is judged by its motive makes you focus on your intentions and be happy with that. So for example, I'm doing this, I don't know what the outcome will be, but I'm very happy that I'm doing this, whether people watch it or not. Okay, why would I be happy? Let's explain. Because I am 100% doing this. Well, maybe who knows my intentions, right? Okay, but let's say to a large degree, I'm doing this video call just because of I love all human beings. I consider them all my brothers and sisters, and I see the world in a lot of pain, a lot of self-inflicted pain as individuals or as societies. And we are making our lives difficult when they don't necessarily need to be. There are difficult things that happen, but we can still feel happy through them. Um, and so, uh, yeah. So I'm happy inside because of that intention, and I focus on my intentions. And you'll find that when you focus on your intentions and you do good things, obviously your intention should be good things, those things make you happy. Doing good things make you happy. They make you happy as long as you focus on your intentions rather than the result. Yeah, as long as you don't look for a thank you at the end, for example, have zero expectations of saying thank you. In fact, that's part of our religious teaching again, that when you do a good thing, don't expect a thank you. It's not like you expect people to be rude. It's just, and it's not rude if you don't say thank you, by the way. You know, you might just be watching, you might find this a rubbish talk. You might actually find this rubbish. Totally understand. I've got a lot of, practice. I need to do a lot of practice to maybe make this better. So when you have zero expectation, see, my mouth is getting a bit dry from doing a lot of talking in one go. Sorry about slurping in your ears if you heard that. Um, if you have zero expectations of people saying thank you, you're totally focused on doing good things, you're pretty much going to be a very happy person. So that's one thing. I'm just going through a list of things. There's a different little, very mini, small chapters. There's this tiny booklet, and I'm in the moral qualities section. The first one listed of sayings of Prophet Muhammad are a deed is judged by its motive. So that's one way that will lead you to happiness. Number two, what does it say? If something troubles your mind, leave it alone. Another perfect, very subtle thing that will lead you to happiness. So, why does that lead you to happiness? So, when I read that, because I've been practicing so many of these things and I've read these things so many times in my life, immediately I can feel how that has made me happy. But then I have to think or revert to a past example in my head of how that made me happy. So generally speaking, there are things that you're not sure if they're bad, and sometimes you dabble in those unsure gray areas. And when I've done those things, when I've tried, I wasn't sure if it was bad, or I tried to trick myself into believing maybe it's not so bad, and then I started feeling more and more miserable. That's my personal example. But I think I'm trying to think of a way of explaining it so that people in general can. I'm going to get it back into seeing what's happening in the chat just in case something's happening there. Um, yeah, first of all, doing good things makes you happy. So let's uh, say you're wondering if you should cheat in an exam, and somehow you convince yourself that it's okay because maybe you will do something good by cheating in this exam and in a certain exam, and then maybe you'll get a qualification and you'll make loads of money and you'll give it to charity. And so you've created this idea that maybe it's okay to cheat in exams as long as you do something good out of it at the end. That would be a very gray area. Okay, so it's a gray area that you've built by yourself. So gray areas actually are quite often something you've built up. They don't necessarily exist. Like we lie to ourselves all the time. So that's why earlier on I said, when I first said said to you guys, 100% of the reason I'm doing this is because I love you guys as human beings. Then I quickly thought maybe my intentions aren't so pure, and that's very unlikely. My intentions are 100% pure, right? I don't know what those other intentions are. Maybe I want to be famous. I don't know. Not doing particularly good at being famous right now. So, and I didn't really advertise this. So, not particularly thinking this is an attempt to be famous. So, yeah, gray areas are very quick ways to make you miserable. Um, some very important thoughts are coming to my head with regards to this saying, and that is that how do we make big mistakes? They come from bad intentions or small seeds of ill intention. So um, let's say you want to have a relationship outside your marriage. Okay, so what you do is you start by thinking about lots of people who you're not related to and having a relationship with them, and you let your your mind stray again and again because you think like it's not real, it's not affecting anybody, but those things build into action eventually. Or if even if they don't, they still make you miserable. For example, continuing with this example of looking at people who you're not married to, let's say, looking at them lustfully in your head, or even thinking about them lustfully in your head, or looking at pornography or whatever, or even a Hollywood movie and thinking, oh, that actress or that actor looks handsome or something like that, right? Okay, why I want to demonstrate a very important example of how that would make you miserable. So you're in a relationship with a person. Okay, let's say I'm a man, so I'm just going to give an example of I'm in a relationship with my wife, right? As soon as I start even thinking about another person, then what happens is you have to remember your brain is what we call plastic. It's uh, plastic means something that is very easily changed. So you can change your tastes to like a pineapple, or prefer some other food, spaghetti or whatever, right? It's the same as your your liking of your spouse or your wife, your husband, or whatever, right? So if you start liking or thinking about another person, then whatever that person's features are, you might start liking those at the expense of, because you can't really easily like two opposite things, yeah? So one person might have a big nose, another person might have a small nose, right? And you go, oh, I really like that nose, and that nose is completely opposite of my wife's nose. And then what will happen is you'll stop liking your wife. When you love something or like something, it's not because it's the best thing in the world. When you are in love with somebody, it's because you've trained your brain subconsciously, you've trained your brain to like that person. So by looking around, looking at pornography or whatever, you are destroying your relationship in a very subtle way, but it will have a big effect. Um, it's very easy, by the way, to like things that you have no real connection with. For example, you can love a Hollywood actress, okay, from the distance, because you don't have to be in the same house with that lady who could be really, really annoying and have really, really bad habits, yeah, and be really miserable and cruel, for example, yeah. They could be all about themselves. Not saying that's true about all Hollywood actresses, maybe it's true, but I'm just saying it's very easy to like somebody you don't really know and build up sort of your all sorts of illusions about them. So I'm going to wind up this conversation, unless I get some questions, with some kind of summary points of view, not necessarily about what the ways of finding happiness like I just mentioned. I just feel like I've been trying to write a little book. I've been doing quite a lot of things, a lot of experimental things. Been doing this on the streets, by the way. Actually feel like walking around. I don't like sitting down too long. And one book I was writing was trying to explain in depth how you find happiness, and there were many chapters, and I'm just gonna read through the chapter headings to give you a sense of the many diverse ways in which Islam and generally spirituality teaches you how to find happiness. So happiness is not just a selfish idea of you being happy. It's how to generally find happiness, both for yourself, you as a building block of society. If you are happy and other people are happy, then they will create a happier society. Not automatically, but you need those basic building blocks to make a happier society, and so everybody feels happy. Okay, for example, uh, if you're a happier person, you'll be more generous. They're kind of connected. If you're more generous, you'll be happier as well, right? Okay, and therefore, if everybody's generous and kind to each other, you're going to have a happier society. So that's a very brief example. But here are some of the titles that I was thinking of working on. I've started working on them, but it's not that I don't know the answers already. It's just I just do so many experimental things that it takes me a long time to finish anything. So the first chapter is Islam, so just an introduction to it as how it's a universal religion and it's not exclusive. It's not trying to throw people out. It's a club that wants to invite everybody. Happiness is a general topic. Then I went to money. So how do you find happiness through money, or does money buy happiness? There's a long explanation to that. Okay, but I already explained through this very simple. There's a great TED talk I'm referring to again, which is how you can buy happiness. You can just go on YouTube and say TED Talk, TED Talk, 2 words, how to buy happiness, and you'll find it. Right? That's just one example of many cool TED Talks that explain this particular point of view, that money doesn't necessarily buy happiness directly, but if you spend it on other people or through generosity and many other things, you can find happiness. But another side of the money discussion about how to find happiness is that Islam and many different religions like Judaism and Christianity comes from Judaism, so maybe Christianity as well. They talk about economic policies which will make a happier society. And one of those, for example, is do not use interest. Interest as in putting money in the bank and you get money as a result on top of that. Why does that? So there's an economic policy that explain if you have that policy, which we do, that actually dries up money from the poor and gives it to the rich. As one of the problems with it, and there are times in history, for example, which I mentioned in this little book, which I'll probably make for free anyway, where I think it was called Warburg or Werburg. I can't remember. There was a little town in Austria just after the Great Depression. After, yeah, hopefully people understand what the Great Depression is, when many countries around the world were very poor, and then they decided to accidentally they implemented Islamic principles, economic principles, and they become very rich very quickly. So there are economic principles that can make it so that people have enough money, and they should have enough money because there is enough wealth in the world in terms of material goods to consume for everybody to be happy. So if there's an economic system that, in spite of there being enough food in the world, you can still be poor, that means the economic system has a major flaw. Okay, and that economic system is not anti-capitalism, it's not socialism. Islam is somewhere in between. So again, that's if you want to ask me about that, we can talk about that. Next topic is environment. So a lot of people don't realize Islam and all these religions are about solving all problems, including all the major problems we suffer from at the moment, which is including the environment. So Islam talks very early in the beginning of, well, the Quran talks about our ability very early in the Quran that says that we as humanity, when God is kind of, there's all these kind of not not actual conversations, but let's say metaphorical conversations. My English isn't great, but or figurative conversations to describe the planning of what God did. God had a conversation with um, the angels and said, like, I'm going to put this human being on the planet, right? Or it wasn't really quite like that because human beings already exist in one form, but we were going to develop like the next stage of humanity and make them more powerful. And the angel said, "Do you really want to put um, people on this planet who cause this destruction?" And then God didn't say anything other than demonstrate what human beings could do. The point of those particular verses, one of the many points of those particular verses, is to show that yes, we can do really good things, and we can also do really bad things, depending if we use our innate abilities for good and evil. So the short answer to how Islam can help in the environment is this general principle that if you're a happy person, then you'll have a positive outcome in your surroundings. For example, if you're a miserable person, you're on drugs and whatever, then you'll start stealing from the people around you, you'll rob them, kill them, whatever, and you have a miserable effect on your environment. And also, to explain this a little bit further, if you're a miserable person, what you do is you consume more and more things, consume in terms of material goods. You want more and more things, you waste more and more things, you even damage yourself by eating too much and then getting diabetes. And so there's a famous statistic just to demonstrate the fact that we do have plenty of food and things in this world. There was a great headline that came up on the news once, which is 1.5 billion people dying from obesity in the world and 1 billion dying from hunger, meaning there's clearly, like, if people share their food a bit, people wouldn't have to be hungry. So there's plenty of food. We're over consuming. We're making ourselves miserable, making ourselves sick by consuming too much. And we're not just consuming food too much, but we're also consuming technology in the wrong way so much so that we're on Facebook, whatever, having fake connections when really we should be talking to our neighbors. And that's another teaching, about in all religions. You know, for example, in Christianity it says love thy neighbor. In Islam it's very much the same. There are so many rules in Islam that uh, neighbors are almost like family, right? So if you were connected more to your neighbors, that's the beginnings of the building. That's kind of the second step or third step of building a society. There's you, or a happy society. The step one is you should be happy, right? Then step two is you should be in a family or a relationship that should be happy, and then after that you should like step outside and like you should be in the wider family, your wider human family, which is your road, your society, your whatever locality. Okay, love is another chapter. Oh no, government is another one. What's government got to do with happiness? Well, a lot of frustration. I mean, obviously government policies make you happy or less happy if they're good ones or bad ones, but there's a big problem in our relationship at the moment, like with all these what's it called, Black Lives Matter and Brexit and so many other things. There is a lot of frustration between people and their governments all over the world, like so much so that next to no politician is considered trustworthy. People don't like politicians. There's one or two exceptions. I think the Prime Minister of New Zealand is loved by not just her own people, but by other people around the world. But there are a few exceptions. So there, that's a realm which needs to be discussed, and there needs to be trust. That's a whole long discussion anyway. What else? God is as a topic I want to discuss. God is the source of happiness. Okay, so that's a statement. How do I know that statement is true? I'm doing pretty good. I've only got 12 minutes left, eh? I don't think I could last that long. Okay, so yeah, God. Why would God be the source of happiness? So a lot of my explanations or bits of logic, you can do all sorts of psychological experiments, and it'll take a really long time because you'd have to survey thousands of people and ask the right questions. But I try to provide what I might describe as self-evident truths, things that you might look at and you go, oh, okay, I can, from my own experience, that is true, and therefore this must also be true. And so one thing you might experience if you are mentally healthy, so your average person will be finds it relaxing, and there are psychological experiments or social, I can't remember what they call it, that if you go into nature, you find it more relaxing. I've seen experiments to show that. Okay, just by, let me just wake up my screen. Okay, yeah, so if there's human beings have been shown that both they like nature and they like connection with human beings. So there are different levels of connection. You can have a connection with your dog or your cat, or you can have a connection with a human being. And so I'm trying to build up to something here. How do we know that, connection with God is very important? So we there's something. Let's go to the. I did say I'm not brilliant at this, right? And I've been talking for almost an hour, so it's quite difficult. But yeah, what was I saying? So God is there. There is something mystical about and relaxing about nature. Let's focus on that side of things, and then we'll talk about connection with human beings and all that kind of stuff second. There's something mystical about that. Okay, and so we have some sort of, I would like to describe as an intrinsic connection with nature. And if you call God Mother Nature, then definitely connection with Mother Nature would have the same effect as connecting with nature. That's a very vague explanation. Let's go to the connection side of things generally. We know there are a lot of studies that show that the basic need of human beings is connection with other people. But you can have different levels of connection. You can have connection with dogs, and people who have connection with animals as opposed to human beings, or excluding human beings, tend to be less happy, because what they're doing is, why would you have a connection with a dog or a cat? It's because you find you can't handle a connection with human beings because they're more complicated, and your dog, especially in the West, he's usually got collared, is effectively your slave, whether you like to see that or not. Okay, and so that dog will just appease you. dogs are being, let's say, bred to be appeasing, so they can get food and they can make you happy, and they do whatever you want. They're not really going to disagree with you. Um, but that lower level of connection, you'll find, makes you less happy, because you're not really going to have a deep conversation, a meaningful conversation with that person. You might think, why do I need a meaningful conversation? Well, then again, there's another great book by a fantastic or well-regarded psychologist saying that meaning is key to happiness as well. So you need some sort of meaningful and deep conversations. And so the deeper your conversations, or higher level conversations, or your, not just conversations, or higher level relationships you have, the better it is for you psychologically. So what is the highest form of connection, or the highest form of what is it called, existence or awareness? Well, it's going to be God. So that is to some level the reason why you need to connect with God. But there's what we call a practical or empirical experience, which is simply try it out. Simply realize that if you try to do things for God, so whenever you're doing anything, you just do it because you think, God would like me to do good things. And in the Quran and many religions, God is always described as the kind, the gracious, the kind person who bestows things, who wants you to do well, even though bad things happen. But that's another discussion. People can ask me. I haven't checked the live stream for a bit because I've been reading the titles. Okay. So I don't know if people we've been watching, those two people have been watching for 1 whole hour. It's very kind of you. But also one thing I want to quickly explain, like I said a bit earlier on, is believing in God is not an unscientific thing. It's rather the opposite. It is scientific, and not only that, it's unscientific in a logical way of approaching science, to not believe in God. So it's unscientific not to believe in God. Why would I say that? So we know that to make even the smallest bit of you, there's somebody did a bit of maths and looked at just the, I think it's the hemoglobin enzyme. Is it an enzyme? Hemoglobin, the bit that makes your blood cells red. So not even one blood cell, but the thing that makes one bit of a single thing that makes your single red blood cell, for that to be made by random combinations, for that to be made will take longer than the age of the universe. So people get confused about this idea of evolution. I have no problem with evolution. Evolution is something that is actually described in the Quran. The Quran says God is somebody who creates in stages. So that's another misunderstanding about religion. Actually, that's one of the key reasons why people don't go to God and religion, is because of misunderstandings. And this is why something like this question answer can fix many of those problems. So just to give a bit of background in the last few minutes, I'll sit down. So I've done many things obviously before this, like mosque tours. And I find that some people come to those mosque tours very frustrated with preconceived or prejudices against religion. And they ask questions as if they're the hardest questions in the world, and they tend to be so easy to answer. They're just misunderstandings that they've picked up from TV, and they're so easy to answer. When they answer it, they're very impressed by religion. And I've seen that over and over again. And it doesn't take a genius to explain the stuff I'm talking about. There are millions of Muslims who know the things that I'm explaining to you, although they might not feel comfortable explaining it because they're not in the habit of explaining things. Teaching, I'm a school teacher. Teaching is a skill. It takes practice. It takes a lot of failure. I'm not saying I'm doing it well right now. This is how I learn, by doing it, trying it. So I've done this in the streets of London, going with a board, like, I'm a Muslim, ask me anything. I've done lots of videos on YouTube, recording myself, like selfie style, and not even editing the videos. People ask me a question on the spot, I answer them. And so the point of explaining that is that one of the key things that are stopping people from really understanding is by people not asking questions. And this is the point of that. The point of having these videos, this question answer session, not just a talk. This is supposed to be a question answer session, by the way. So anybody can ask questions even now. Got 3 minutes left. Yeah, the purpose is that if people could ask questions, then so many of their misunderstandings will be explained. You might think that people have asked questions, and those misunderstandings still exists. You hardly ever have. What normally actually happens is that a person will say, like a person who's anti-Muslim, for example, he will give a point of view, and basically things are often one-sided, and there aren't enough places where you can have good question answer sessions where people are openly listening to people, not trying to debate or argue against. And when you're having a debate, this is probably the final thing I suppose I'll mention in the last 2 minutes. When you're having a debate, that's not actually a way to learn things. Because when you're having a debate, you're trying to prove the other person wrong. You're not open-mindedly listening to the other person, and that's another spiritual teaching that you should make very. When you're having a conversation and when you're trying to learn something, be very clear who's a teacher and who is a student. Because if you don't have the student mindset, you will not learn. There's lots of beautiful, subtle teachings in Islam. So even if there's somebody who I don't really have enemies as such, but let's say somebody who didn't like Islam, and I was listening to him, I'll try to listen to see where that person is correct. And my final point is one phrase that will change your life. That is love for all and hatred for none. If you have that, then love opens your mind to truth. And there's a great teaching of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, says that it goes something like, and I'll give this as an ending quote. I like to finish off with not my words, but the words of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And it goes something like, let's see if I got it on the top of this page, happiness, here we go. Top of the page, here we go, where are we, top of the page. You will not enter paradise or have happiness until you have faith, and you will not have faith until you love each other. Shall I show you something that if you did it, you would love each other? Spread peace between yourselves, or that means offer the salam. That's how Muslims, Christians, and Jewish people actually originally used to greet each other. So Jewish people used to say shalom or assalamu alaikum, which is the equivalent to assalamu alaikum, which means peace be upon you. That's how people say hello. And when you say that, it means you have to say it meaningfully from your heart. And when you do that as a habit, you find love for everybody, and then you'll be open-minded, and you'll suddenly start feeling super happy. Thank you for listening, guys.